Story 1. I always knew my Uncle Jerry as a kid. He was a cool guy, but mostly a stranger who lived a few hours away and would only visit once a year or so. We were really close with the rest of the extended family, so this was a bit unusual, but I never really thought about it. It wasn't until later that I realized Uncle Jerry was much older than my dad, who was supposedly my grandparents' oldest child. It turns out Uncle Jerry was my grandmother's teenage pregnancy, whom she had given up for adoption and reconnected with us when I was a baby. Back then, these things were often kept secret, so she had gone to live with her older sister in the countryside while pregnant and returned later. Even most of her brothers and sisters didn't know. It was a big shock when he came back into our lives, but they all welcomed him. He was lucky to have been adopted by a wonderful family. Now he is just Uncle Jerry who visits occasionally and sends Christmas candy every year. Story 2. This is a very personal story. I am legally blind. I have been since I was about 2 years old. Multiple surgeries, lots of hospital time, retina specialists, and so on throughout my whole life. My parents told me that I lost my sight because I cried a lot when I was a baby, and that was it. In adulthood, when I would go to the retinal doctor, they would ask how it happened, and I would tell them, well, I guess I cried a lot. They were skeptical. 2 decades after my mother died, and shortly after my father died, I was told the real story by 2 different extended family members. My mother was always an alcoholic. That part one knew. What I did not know was that when I was a baby, yes, I cried, and my mother would bang my head on the floor to stop me from crying. It destroyed my retinas. This was confirmed with an unrelated magnetic resonance imaging I had done in 2021, where the notes mentioned a perinatal insult. So both my parents took that little tidbit to their graves. Thanks, guys. Love you. Story 3. My grandfather lost his mother as a child, and it was always a sensitive topic for him. Every time I asked how it happened, I was told that she was very sick and eventually passed away. When I was about 15 years old and had a reproductive health talk with my mother, we touched on the topic of abortion. She then revealed that my great-grandmother actually died from the consequences of an unsafe abortion gone wrong. At that time, abortion was illegal where we lived. She decided to go through with it because my great-grandfather was an abusive alcoholic and a cheater who subjected her to marital rape, and she could not support the children she already had. Worse, he later married one of the women he cheated with, and they had more children. That woman then proceeded to abuse my 4-year-old grandfather and his sister, for example, by starving them and tying them to the kitchen table while she fed her own children. They all lived in the same village, just a few houses from each other. The local drunk I sometimes saw while visiting my grandparents was actually my great-grandfather. My grandfather cut all ties with him, so he never got to know my mother or me. It was shocking to learn that at that age, and I believe it inspired me to advocate for women's rights. Story 4. Found out my uncle was actually my half-brother. My dad had a child before meeting my mom, and no one ever told me. This explains a lot about the weird family dynamics growing up. Story 5. My grandmother, the very judgmental Christian, gave birth to my father exactly 9 months after they married. When they passed away, we emptied their home and found an old safe. It contained smelly money, the deed to their home, and the marriage certificate dated a whole month after the date they claimed to have gotten married. She had the audacity to criticize and find my mother lacking because she, too, was pregnant before marriage. Story 6. I was in college and broke up with my boyfriend because I found out he slept with my friend. I cried for weeks to my mother over the double betrayal. A couple of months went by, and eventually, I discovered my mother is bisexual, which is totally fine. The problem is that I found out that said friend not only slept with my boyfriend, but had also been seeing my mother for several months. This caused a huge rift, as they dated for about a decade. She only recently apologized for choosing her former friend over her daughter. Story 7. My mother, who looked down on divorced women and constantly made disparaging remarks about my divorce, was actually divorced before she met my father. Story 8. Grandpa was closeted his entire life. He knew all of the local power players and big deals because he was the manager of the menswear department at the fanciest department store in town. I still remember walking around downtown with him, He could never make it more than a block without someone wanting to stop and chat. My uncle is also gay, and because our city isn't very big, there was a very limited queer scene when he came out in the 1980s. The family found out because he started hearing a lot of, "Oh, you're so and so. I know your father." Grandpa and a few dozen other married men used to go up to an isolated roundabout in a local park. They called it the Fruit Loop and get busy in the bushes. Half of the fathers on my mom's street growing up were apparently in the Fruit Loop Club. Anyway, the whole thing got exposed. Grandma served him divorce papers. He unsuccessfully attempted suicide, but things mostly calmed down. Grandma was remarried by the time I was born, so I didn't know any of it. I suspected, and he vehemently denied it, but only got confirmation when we were moving Grandpa into hospice and my uncle, who is blind, told me to go into a specific dresser drawer and destroy everything in it. I did my duty and didn't look too hard at anything. But yeah, he was a great grandfather and I miss him dearly. I'm glad he had my mom because otherwise I wouldn't exist. But I do wish he'd felt comfortable being himself before he died. Story 9. I found out my mom was one of the Tennessee Children's Home Society stolen babies. She and her sister were taken by a woman named Georgia Tan, and their parents were tricked into signing away their parental rights with promises of sending the girls to excellent schools and other lies. Both girls were taken to different states and sold to new parents. It was called adoption, but it was a black market baby ring. My mom discovered this when I was 15 years old. My mom abandoned me and my two older brothers when I was very small, and my dad raised us. Over time, I came to understand that my mom had been badly abused by her adoptive mother and was mentally ill, partly because of the abuse. I am the only girl, so I have always resented her for leaving me and for not having a mom. Unfortunately, by the time I understood what she had been through, she had already passed away. There is a lot more to it than that, but that is the brief version. It is a lot to carry around. Story 10. On a random day, I realized that my mother's biggest hater is her own family. That's the day I understood that, but their family means nothing. Story 11. The reason my dad's brother does not talk to him is that while my dad was married to his high school sweetheart, he had an affair with his brother's girlfriend, my mom. The reason my mom did not speak to her sister for several years is that after my mom caught my dad having his estimated 1,000th affair, her sister said, "That is how you got him." There has also been some strange behavior hinted at between my aunt, my mom's sister, and two of my uncles, neither her brother. One is my dad's brother, the other is my other sister's husband. Story 12. A family member has more money than the others. The other family members formed a team to dislike this person because they would not give them money. This shows how money can easily ruin relationships. Story 13. At the end of my father's life, he lost a lot of capacity. In some of his more lucid moments, he was mostly present but had zero filter. That's how I found out my mother's oldest brother had been accused of molesting his oldest daughter and was required to move out of his family home during the investigation. My father believed he had done it and struggled with my mother to keep her brother away from us. However, my mother and her entire family supported my uncle. He lived with his parents for the duration. My mother refused to cut him off or keep him away. Eventually, my cousin recanted her claims, my uncle moved back in, and everyone pretended everything was fine. My cousin was always regarded as troubled and an outcast by most of that side of the family. For context, my uncle has always been strangely touchy. The first time I realized it was unusual or felt uncomfortable was at my high school graduation party when I was talking to friends and my uncle came up behind me and started rubbing my shoulders. I did not know who it was, but I saw my friends' faces change with discomfort. After my father revealed the story, my mind was flooded with memories of my touchy uncle. I still do not know what really happened. I do not remember if his behavior was appropriate with me or other children, but it made me certain of one thing. Peace at all costs only protects abusers and creeps, and I was never going to be complicit like my family. I have never been able to bring myself to ask my mother about it. Story 14. I overheard my dad multiple times joking with his friends about how he does not get any and my mom does not put out. I brought it up to her once after he died, and she rolled her eyes. She told me that they did not have sex for nearly 8 years because my dad's arthritis became so severe he told my mom, He never wanted to have sex again because it was too painful for him. The whole situation was his responsibility, but there he was, talking to his friends. Story 15. My dad's parents never talked about their childhoods. Years later, I got into genealogy. I found the death certificates for my grandparents. My grandfather's mother committed suicide in 1922, leaving behind 7 children. My grandmother's mother died in 1919 from complications of an abortion. Both were married to alcoholics. This explained a lot about my grandparents' behavior. My grandfather was very good to my grandmother. I suspect he was determined not to treat his wife the way his mother was treated. My grandmother was 3 when her mother died. I'm pretty sure her childhood was horrible and she was definitely a mess. Story 16. My parents got divorced in the 1970s. I learned through a chance discovery many years later that my father was cheating on my mother at that time. My mother's next husband was an unpleasant, overweight, illiterate man from a rural area. I later learned that she had a child by this person before she met my father. It is strange because she was much better than this person in every way. I also learned that my mother's brother had encouraged the then young man to pursue my mother out of malice toward her. My uncle is a malevolent person. Story 17. My mom has a sister I did not know about until I was 16. I found a school picture of a girl named Kathy, and my grandma snatched it away from me and said, "She is nobody." I asked my mom and she had a full meltdown. She told me it was her older sister from my grandma's first marriage who has not had anything to do with them for years. I told my grandma off and disappeared from their lives. I wish her well. My grandma is a rotten human being, and my mom is not much better. Story 18. This will probably get buried, but since you asked. Trigger warning. This is pretty gruesome. In 2006, my dad, who was a severe alcoholic, was sent to prison for voluntary manslaughter. The victim was my grandmother, his mother. I was told that he had pushed her and she hit her head when she fell. I believe this because, despite my dad's addiction, he was never really violent. Plus, he only served about 5 years for manslaughter, so surely it couldn't have been anything like murder, right? Wrong. A few years after he was released, my dad forwarded an email he received from my mom, which said, "Unlike the Menendez brothers, you used your bare hands." He copied my mom on this email so she could see that he sent it to me. My mom, bless her little heart, still hadn't quite figured out the difference between reply and reply all, so she responded to his email thinking she was only responding to him. She told him about how she had been protecting me from the truth all these years, that my cousin had read the autopsy report, and how my aunt and uncle had told her to tell me what actually happened, but she didn't want me to know. I immediately realized there was more to the story than I had been told, and when I saw the line about the autopsy report, it occurred to me that it is a public record I could easily obtain. So I drove down to the medical examiner's office and got it. It turns out my dad had actually strangled my grandmother to death while blackout drunk. I was shocked. My dad gave his attorney permission to give me all the other documents related to the case. I met with this attorney and was given a massive stack of paperwork. Police reports, court transcripts, even crime scene photos. He was originally charged with murder but took a plea deal for voluntary manslaughter, also known as a crime of passion, hence the very short prison sentence. So yeah, that was definitely the biggest family secret that I found out by accident. This all happened over a decade ago, and while I have mostly come to terms with it, it definitely still messes with my head. The biggest problem with secrets is that they are not very good at staying secret. Story 19. I don't know about a whole view on life or even a secret. Our grandmother was a scold, an uptight, prissy snob. Our table manners were never good enough. She didn't want us to be left-handed. She looked down on the unwashed masses. As children, we instinctively hated her and thought nothing more about it. When I was 40 years old, I learned that she grew up in downstate Illinois, almost Kentucky, on a work farm and halfway house. Her family owned the farm and was paid by the county to take in the infirm, the mentally ill, felons from jail, and anybody who would end up in the poorhouse. This was her world as a toddler, and she learned to differentiate herself so as not to be mistaken for just another end of the roader. This taught me that people are the way they are for a reason. Still didn't like her. Story 20. My uncle, who was a pastor in Indiana, was reported to have died in a car crash. His car went over a bridge into a river. It turns out he faked his death and was caught in Colorado with his mistress, the church secretary. Story 21. My great-great-great-grandfather impregnated a 13-year-old girl from the farm nearby. After they married, she died giving birth to their second child at 16. He then impregnated and married her younger sister, who was 13 at the time. The second woman is my great-great-great-grandmother. This was rural Kentucky in the 1700s, so I do not know how shocking that actually was. Story 22. Finding out I was adopted at 16, only to be told I was half adopted and that mom, the woman who raised me, was not my biological mother but dad. The man who raised me was my biological father. Later, at 25, I found out I was fully adopted and that dad was not my biological father. When I confronted him, he did not know. Somehow, my biological mother and adoptive mother tricked him. I was basically the result of an illegal back alley adoption. Story 23. My mother lied to me my whole life about my father. They split when I was 3, and I was told that he deserted us, was not paying child support, and never tried to get in touch. When he did start paying child support, and my mother won a legal case for back payments, she spent $25,000 on unknown expenses. When I was a teenager, she would show me receipts for child support payments under $20 as an excuse for why we were so poor. More than 20 years later, when we sat down to reconnect, he showed receipts, returned sealed letters, and the divorce judgment stating I was supposed to spend summers with him and see him on other holidays. Those $20 child support payments were beyond what was required by the state, and the state chose to send them separately. She hid the fact that he was actually paying and paying extra to try to manipulate me further. It turns out he was the stable, consistent parent, and I did not find out until after a work accident that left him with a traumatic brain injury. I have gone no contact with her and will not speak with her again. She will never get to meet her grandson. Story 24. My much younger brother came up to me one day and asked, "Why would Mom say to me that I look so much like your Uncle Eddie?" Eddie is her uncle on her side of the family. By marriage, I had to look into that, which was a minor relief. Our dad had bladder cancer and was assumed to be sterile after treatments. Following my birth, my brother was a miracle baby. Our dad passed away from cancer, and Mom made this comment about 5 years after his death. My mom has a history of alcoholism and a vague history of at least emotional affairs. I am no contact with her for many reasons, mostly due to the alcohol. I am not planning to get an ancestry test anytime soon. Story 25. My grandmother's death was likely an assisted suicide via morphine overdose. She was in a lot of pain in the hospital and asked one of her sisters to end it. It is unclear how this was accomplished, but it feels dark and is a strange rumor to have circulating in the family. Story 26. That my great-aunt was actually my biological great-grandmother because she had a baby, my grandmother, out of wedlock back in the 1920s when it was taboo. Story 27. I went to my father's ancestral country for the first time to visit and decided to climb a mountain to scatter his ashes. A couple of days later, I met my dad's cousin for the first time. She had a thoroughly documented family history and genealogy book. It turned out the same mountain where I scattered my dad's ashes was where my dad's aunt had gone missing in the 1970s, and her body was never found. It was a remarkable coincidence considering it was a small, unpopular mountain in a country full of mountains. Story 28. I don't know if it is a family secret, but my mom didn't talk much about her parents and such. My aunt, her younger sister, told me at my mom's funeral that they are children from an affair my grandma had with a married man. Their stepfather, who later married my grandma, tried to rape my mom when she was a teenager, and my grandma didn't leave him. For context, I didn't know my grandparents. They all died either before my birth or when I was very little. My older half-sister also told me that she never accepted my dad, her stepfather, at my mom's funeral. My dad died when I was 14 years old. I don't know why they thought I needed to know these things then and at such a time, but I am low contact with them anyway. Story 29. I am sure there are many secrets I have not learned and will not learn. On my mother's side, she had 6 siblings, and I only met about half of them. All of them were alcoholics or had severe issues consistent with either borderline or narcissistic personality disorder. I learned in my early 20s that I am 1/8 Native American. This was a long-held family secret until casino and oil money became available, but you had to have lived on the reservation, which they did not understand. On my father's side, my grandfather's parents had an arranged marriage. His father, my great-grandfather, supposedly disappeared quickly, but they had 7 children, so he did not disappear that fast. My grandfather also had many stories involving the mafia, so I suspect organized crime was somehow involved. In my life, I suspect that I am not the biological father of 2 of my 3 legal children. I eventually caught my ex in an affair, which is why we are not married. I am certain her affair partner is not their father due to several factors. I am also quite sure he was not her only affair partner. Both children were conceived under suspicious circumstances. I know she cheated, and neither child resembles me or my family, in my opinion. Story 30. My brother apparently died of sudden infant death syndrome at 4 months old. All my life, my alcoholic mother blamed my lazy father for not putting him in his crib when she went to the toilet, as he was on the waterbed. I was verbally abused because I was born 3 days after his birthday and never had any decent birthdays. She left and got married when I was 13. I found the reports and death certificate while trying to find my birth certificate. My father did not arrive at the scene until after the ambulance and police. My mother left her child alone on a waterbed. My nanny and I had a serious talk with hard truths. She lost her faith and her daughter when he died. I packed up and moved out before my mother returned remarried. I have not been back since. I take sudden infant death syndrome very seriously, but I do not believe that incident was sudden infant death syndrome. It was negligence that caused his death. Story 31. For context, both of my parents immigrated to my home country from their respective home countries. My dad was very involved in a local organization run by and for people from his country, which led to him meeting his best friend. They both came here at different times, him as an adult and his friend as a child, but they are around the same age currently. I grew up calling this friend my uncle, as is standard for our culture. Until recently, I was told my uncle came to this country because he had been adopted as a child by a local family. He has always been a little odd, completely harmless but odd. He is the kind of person who would give a stranger the shirt off his back if they needed it more than he did. He has always struggled with money because he is far too trusting and generous, and his relationships have been troubling. Mainly because he will do everything to help someone he thinks is in need. He is fairly well adjusted as an adult but still quite odd, with strange jokes and trouble with social cues and boundaries. I chalked it up to being from another country and also being adopted by people who no longer speak to him. I was chatting with my mom about this after my uncle sent me a strange post on Facebook. Nothing harmful, just not the sort of thing you would expect an uncle to send to his niece. That's when my mom told me how he actually ended up in our country. He had not been adopted. He had been sold. His birth parents, for reasons unknown, sold him to a family here in need of a farmhand. Not hired, sold as a child slave in exchange for a single payment. He grew up essentially trained to be willing to do anything for other people. That is why he is so odd and generous. It broke my heart. Story 32. I just found out my great-grandmother gave birth to her first child when she was 11 and went on to have 10 more children with the same man, who was married but not to her. This was apparently common for the island my family is from. Story 33. I recently found out from an older sibling that my dad is not my biological father. I have been dealing with numerous severe medical symptoms for 2 years without any answers. I finally received multiple diagnoses, only to discover that these illnesses are genetic. None of my parents have these illnesses or genetic issues, but the man my older sibling caught red-handed with my mom while she was still with my dad does. My blood type differs from my siblings, and I lost my hearing due to a genetic condition common in that man's family. Upon research, I realized my birth certificate was never signed by my dad until I was 7. My updated birth certificate now has my dad's name on it. My mom says it was a clerical error and nothing more. I cannot express how betrayed I feel. I have not told anyone since I found out. My mother will take the secret to her grave. When I ask her questions, she gives quick, calculated answers that are outright lies. In summary, I became very ill and was diagnosed with multiple genetic conditions. No one in my family has a history of these illnesses. My sibling admitted to catching my mom cheating just before I was conceived. My biological father is not the man I thought he was. Story 34. When I was a kid, my grandmother had a lot of cats that kept dying. Sometimes they lived for months, sometimes years, but one by one they all ended up dying. A few times a year, I would come home from school and find out that another one had died unexpectedly. It got run over by a car, is what the adults always told me. Turns out my grandmother just liked killing cats. She had a variety of torture and killing methods, her favorite being drowning them in bleach. If she ever had a rough day or anything, she would just grab one of the cats and have some fun. What really bothers me is not just what my grandmother used to do, but the fact that all the adults in the family apparently knew and didn't say anything or stop her from getting more cats. Story 35. I didn't really flip things, but I had a great aunt who ran a brothel in a Navy town up until the end of World War II. My grandfather served in World War I, and upon being shipped home, he was discharged in New York City. He got all his pay and then disappeared for a couple of months. Nobody knew where he was. The army said, "We discharged him. Not our problem." When he finally showed up back home, he just said he was taking a look around. And that was that. Story 36. I had always been told that my great-grandparents were killed by a drunk driver. A couple of years ago, I learned that while this is technically true, it was a single-car accident. Story 37. My grandma was a very sweet lady, but sometimes she said really hurtful things and had strange nights when she asked about a little baby girl. It was not until right before her death that I found out she had actually been schizophrenic. The little baby girl she kept asking about was a baby she had been forced to abort because my granddad, her husband, did not want daughters, only sons. Story 38. My mom had been married before my dad. I was looking through old photos for a family history project in high school and saw an album with an elaborate wedding. My mom and someone I did not recognize were in the photos. My parents also got married in a courthouse. I showed the album to my dad and asked him who the man was. He told me to ask my mom. After a lot of hesitation, she told me that he was her first husband. They got divorced because he turned out to be gay. Story 39. My uncle was molested by a priest. All the brothers remained altar boys, and my grandmother went to the Catholic Church 6 days a week until she died. All the siblings are still devout Catholics. It turns out my uncle is not just moody. He is carrying trauma and betrayal. Story 40. My white great-aunt, who had 2 children with a black man, would lock them in a closet when they were kids whenever she had friends over, because she did not want the friends to know she had black children. Also, my grandmother and one of her sisters were cousins because their mother cheated on her husband with his brother. No one knew until he was dead, but my grandfather, who was horrible to all of us, was gay and left everything to his partner when he died, and nothing to my mother. Story 41. In many ways, my childhood was great. My parents always encouraged me and told me that I, a girl, could do anything I wanted, except play the drums, trumpet, or tackle football. Looking back, that was more about their peace and quiet than my gender. I saw the world as a generally fair place but still advocated for feminism because I felt every girl and woman should have the opportunities one did. Many years later, I began genealogical research. I learned that my maternal grandmother had just turned 17 when she had my mom, and my grandfather was not the biological grandfather. The biological grandfather was nearly 20 years older than my grandmother, already married, and had a child. Then I learned that my paternal great-grandmother was not only adopted but then sold by her adoptive parents to my paternal great-grandfather at the age of 13 or 14. She then spent the next 20 years pregnant, giving birth and caring for children. As I work my way up the matrilineal lines, I observe this country walking backwards in time. I am now fervently and militantly feminist. Story 42. My mom was always secretive about her past. She wasn't close to her family, never taught us her native language, and seemed evasive when answering any questions about her life before she met my dad. Felt like she was keeping us away from her family. She was also very concerned that I was going out whoring around. Bad grade? I must be pregnant. Made a new guy friend? I must be sleeping with him. Used tampons? It's because they make me feel good, true, but not in the way she implied. I don't know what made me come to the conclusion or why it took so long, but suddenly it dawned on me that she must have another child. It just made so much sense. Then, for some reason, my parents decided to tell my husband about it, thinking he wouldn't tell me. I still haven't told my mom that I know. She went to great lengths to keep this from us, so I feel it's like pretending I don't know. Her sibling has told us some things, probably what she was afraid would happen, and it seems like she was traumatized by the whole experience. Story 43. Growing up, I was told my first cousins were the product of incest and there was a rift in the family because of it. There was a lot of drama at the time. My parents told me their parents were also cousins. I recently started working on our family tree and have come to realize the parents were not cousins. They were siblings. This is not as dramatic as some other stories, but I never had anyone to tell. Story 44. My great-aunt was transgender. I did not know until I was an adult and saw a photo of her before her transition. The surprising part is that my very Mormon parents were strongly protective of her. Story 45. My grandmother lived to the age of 92 before discovering she had a half-sister because her father had an affair with a neighbor. Unfortunately, her half-sister passed away before they could meet. Story 46. The way my parents acted when my paternal grandfather passed away, when I was 11, shocked me. It was the first time I had seen their ability to have a completely duplicitous perspective. Immediately after he passed away, they dropped the act of being polite and nice to my grandfather while he was alive. I saw them both drop their masks regarding their relationship with him. I remember them smiling, sighing, and shaking their heads, as if they had been playing the nice card the whole time to wait until my grandfather's will was sorted out. I was completely shocked that they had clearly been fake with him the entire time. In his defense, there was an extremely tender moment that same day when I saw my dad cry for the first and last time while helping carry his father's coffin during the funeral mass. Who knows? Maybe there is much more to that whole story than I will ever know. My mother did something similarly odd at my dad's deathbed. She entered the hospice room with one of my brothers. My dad was hours from death and unable to move, speak, or respond. I was sitting with him quietly. Then my mother and brother suddenly appeared for a final visit. I expected them to say or do something kind and gentle, as we all had been doing for months. Instead, they jeered at him. They said something insulting about him and then walked out together. My blood ran cold. In the 8 years since my dad's passing and the 42 years since my grandfather's passing, I have forced myself to remember that no matter how kind people can genuinely be most of the time, it is important to have a kind mind but a smart heart, and to remember that even people who are usually cordial can be quite fake. I send my deepest sympathy and condolences to everyone who has shared their experiences. Story 47. I wouldn't say it turned my life upside down or anything. It was just something I never knew. My mother died in 2021, and as I was cleaning out her apartment, I found paperwork with her birth date but a different name, along with adoption papers with my grandmother and grandfather's names. I called my uncle, my mother's brother, and he told me that my mother was born out of wedlock. My grandmother was not married to my mother's biological father, and this was back in the 1930s. When my grandmother married my grandfather, he legally adopted my mother and they changed her name. Apparently, my mother knew and had been in contact with her biological father for a while. I don't know how long. She never mentioned it to me, or if she did, I honestly don't remember. She never referred to my grandfather as her stepfather, nor did she refer to my uncles as her stepbrothers or half-brothers. I don't know how many other people in my family know about this because we are all spread out now. Since my grandmother, who was the rock of our family, died, we haven't had the chance to get together much anymore. It doesn't change anything major in my life. I just wonder why she never told me. Story 48. My mom was abandoned by her parents and raised by her grandparents. They were both alcoholics, and she was always told that was the reason why. During the pandemic, I picked up some of her dad's military records that I had ordered a year or so previously and discovered that he was deployed during the time she would have been conceived. This led me down a deep rabbit hole with DNA, where I finally found her dad. He has been dead about 5 or 6 years, unfortunately, but she has half-siblings out there. It would seem that while her legal dad was deployed, her mom cheated on him, became pregnant, and when he came home after 2 years, she had a 1-year-old child. This rocked their marriage for obvious reasons, and he moved to another state. Her mom left my mom behind and went after him. They ended up having 3 more children together, but it was a very rocky marriage, and my mom always wondered why they kept her siblings but did not want her. This led me to find out that my mom has some very bizarre views on family. She said she has no interest in contacting her half-siblings because it would destroy their world. She is older than them and was born 4 to 5 years before their dad even met their mom. She also said that even if he were alive, she would not want to contact him because most likely he never knew about her, and it would just remind him of a past mistake. I do not understand it at all. Story 49. The story of how I have 3 dads. When I was 17 years old, my mom confessed to me that my dad, Dad A, is not my biological father. This came up when I was asking questions for genetics homework from school. A few years later, I asked for more details about the situation. Apparently, when my mom was married to Dad A, she was also involved with some of the doctors at work, both Dad B and Dad C, and ended up getting pregnant with me by Dad B. My mom knows this because I look exactly like Dad B, and also because Dad B was suspicious and took a blood sample from me while I was in the neonatal intensive care unit. He conducted a paternity test. Dad B was a colleague and doctor friend of Dad C. When I was 8 years old, my mom divorced Dad A and married my stepfather, Dad C. Dad C was amazing and the father I always needed. Unfortunately, Dad C passed away when I was 26, so we had a big celebration of life for him. My mom didn't tell me ahead of time, but she invited Dad B, my biological father, to the celebration. This was my first opportunity to meet him, and it was essentially at Dad C's funeral. I had searched for Dad B and knew what he looked like, so I spotted him right away. He introduced himself, asked if I knew who he was, and I said yes. He took a picture of us and then left. That is the only time I have met my biological father, and I have been trying to get in touch with him ever since. Sadly, I still have contact with Dad A. He is a rough person and in and out of prison frequently. I have never told him the truth that I am not his child, as I think it would destroy him. But there are times when he is an absolute jerk and I am tempted to tell him. Story 50. I received a Facebook message from a lady in Germany asking about my mother and brother, confirming details that impressed me. She then revealed that she was my aunt, living in Germany, and that my father's family had been looking for me for years. My mother had essentially walked away when I was a baby and changed our names. Back in those days, it was relatively easy to become invisible in New Zealand. She then dropped a bombshell. Did I know I had half-siblings as well? 2 half-sisters and a half-brother. My half-brother is 2 weeks younger than me. There was a complicated situation between my mother, my father, and his wife, who he had split with, as she came to terms with being a lesbian. Not an easy feat in the early 1980s, I imagine. That difficult love triangle tore apart 2 families and 2 best friends, leaving me unaware of who my father was or that I had half-siblings until I was 27. Absolutely insane. Story 51. I took an ancestry deoxyribonucleic acid kit for fun, and that is how I found out the man who raised me is not my biological father. I was 6 months pregnant and had to tell him a day before my baby shower because I live far away, and no one else in my family knew this secret either. Story 52. It turns out my family had a secret which I discovered when I took a DNA test through Ancestry.com. I had often seen photographs of my great-grandparents with another couple. The couple was my great-grandfather's brother and his wife. There were also many photographs of just my great-grandmother and her sister-in-law. What was interesting was this couple was an interracial couple. He was white and she was black. It turns out this black woman in the photographs was not only my great-grandmother's sister-in-law. She was actually my great-grandmother's older half-sister. The 2 sisters married brothers. My great-great-grandmother was mixed race. She was married 3 times. twice to black men, and then finally to my great-great-grandfather, who was a white man. When she married my great-great-grandfather, she was a twice widow with a child fathered by a black man. The marriage between my great-great-grandparents took place in Indiana in 1888. Never, while my great-grandmother, my grandmother, and my parents were alive, did they share that we had black ancestry. My family was against racism in every form. Yet, in my opinion, hypocritically, they did not think to share that my great-great-grandmother and my great-great-aunt were people of color. My grandmother is actually named after this half-sister. Not once did I ever hear them mention their names or tell their stories, which, by the way, are mind-blowing. All of this sent me into months of ancestry research. My ancestry is full of interesting people with fascinating and extraordinary life stories. I saw how they overcame adversity and how they married and built a life. Because they did, I exist. Also, a few years back, when they were declassifying pages of the Warren Commission's findings of the John F. Kennedy assassination, my late uncle's name appeared several times. We always knew that my late uncle worked for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. What we did not know was he was a special agent who worked very closely with J. Edgar Hoover. He was one of the lead investigators on the Kennedy assassination case. He died before all of this declassification. Man, I would have loved to have spoken with him about it at a family reunion. Not that he would have allowed such a conversation, but it would have been fun to try to open one at least. My uncle was a decorated World War II soldier who was injured at Iwo Jima. He had the demeanor of Andy Taylor on the Andy Griffith Show. Story 53. The reason my oldest sister was outed by the whole family was that she had a one-night stand with our cousin-in-law, which was understandable. The reason my uncle was outed by the whole family was that he was gay, which was unreasonable. Story 54. My mom used methamphetamine while pregnant with me, and it was so severe that I tested positive for methamphetamine at birth. I found this out accidentally when I requested a copy of my medical records from when I was a minor and decided to review them. My theory is that it affected my brain enough to make me neurodivergent. I was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, conduct disorder, and dyslexia as a child, and to this day I still struggle with some of the symptoms. What troubles me is that I will never know if I suffered brain damage before I was born or if I would have been neurodivergent even if my mother had led a healthy lifestyle. Story 55. You all have crazy stories. My father knew about his surprise 40th birthday party but acted surprised for everyone else. He told us 14 years later on a family vacation. We have a lot of drama. Story 56. My dad was already married. My parents did not get married until I was about 12 when my dad had his wife declared dead. Nobody could find her. Strange. Story 57. My grandmother was always a horrible, mean woman. Vindictive, spiteful, and would turn family members against each other because everyone wanted to please her. Judgmental of people and always very Christian. My grandfather passed away when my mom was a child, so I never met him, but all accounts were that my grandparents were soulmates. It turns out she got pregnant with my oldest uncle while my grandfather was still married to his first wife. My grandparents met while he was on temporary duty to Fort Hood. He left his first family, his wife and 3 kids, in Michigan and moved to Texas with the love of his life. He proceeded to marry my grandmother and have 8 kids, dying when the youngest was a toddler. It wasn't until after my grandmother's death that my mom and her siblings reached out to this other family. By that time, all their half-siblings had died, and it was very apparent that his first wife raised those kids in absolute poverty. This was the 1940s, when women didn't have many options. I didn't learn anything about this until my mom called me one day to tell me that they were taking a road trip to see my half-cousins in Kentucky. Like what? It should be noted that after my grandfather passed away, my grandmother was left with the house, his pension, and his Social Security. Not rich, but able to keep her kids fed and clothed, buy a small bakery, and put them all to work. I'm sure she never gave half a thought to the other family who got nothing from this man and had very different outcomes. Story 58. Watching my dad abandon every value he ever taught me because apparently morals only count when your politician is losing. Story 59. Didn't really change anything for me but still messed up. My grandmother helped my father cover up my childhood sexual abuse by a neighbor child because he probably fell asleep and knew my mother would leave him if she found out. I always knew my father was a piece of shit and my grandmother was manipulative, but a part of me still wishes I had been surprised. He was unemployed while my mother was the full-time breadwinner. She allowed him to watch their children, me and my little brother, until she came home and found my 2-year-old brother in the front yard and my father asleep on the couch. Our street was off a 3-lane, one-way highway. This wasn't the first time she came home to him asleep with no idea where we were in the house. I always had the memory of the childhood sexual abuse, but I couldn't remember much or how my parents reacted. Then, when I was in middle school and in therapy for my parents' divorce, my grandmother mentioned it to my therapist, which confirmed for me that the memory was real. Recently, I wanted to restart therapy and create a timeline for the various abuses I've gone through. This is how my mother found out 2 months ago when I asked her if I had any therapy or counseling with a therapist or pastor for my childhood sexual abuse. I didn't love comforting my mother about my childhood sexual abuse while simultaneously processing that everyone who knew what happened to me or could give me more details is dead. But I was also not surprised that I had to. Story 60. I found out that my father was a pedophile and a pervert. I don't think my family ever planned on telling me, but my brother's then girlfriend, now wife, told me the truth about the person who was supposed to be my father. When I was only a couple of years old, my dad was preying on my older sister and one of the maids we had at the time who was only 16 or 17 years old. He showed my sister his genitals and raped our maid. The maid went to tell my mom, but my mom, blinded by love, did not believe her. My sister also came forward and told my mom, but again, my mom didn't believe her. That maid ended up resigning, leaving a note on her pillow. Apparently, my mother paid the maid to keep silent so she wouldn't report my father to the police. This completely changed my perspective on everything in my life. How love can make you so blind that you do things that go against your moral compass, and how the people in your life can be totally different from who you think they are. Even now, I am still quite shocked. My relationship with my mom has never been the same since I found this out. My view of my dad is completely different, and I have never been able to look my sister in the eyes properly. Up until now, my relationship with her has not been the best. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.